while everyone around her was cheering and singing along at the Elvis concert. 9-year-old Sarah Mitchell sat crying in her seat because that morning her mother had looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I don't want you anymore," before walking out the door with her suitcase, leaving Sarah completely alone in the world. Sarah's world had crumbled that morning. The words her mother had spoken while standing at the door with her packed bags had shattered the little girl's heart into a million pieces. "You're just a burden to me, Sarah. I want to be free now." When Elvis noticed that small girl's tears amid thousands of cheering fans, he would show her what real love truly meant. Sarah Mitchell had woken up that Tuesday morning with excitement bubbling in her chest. Today was the day she and her mother, Linda, were supposed to go to the Elvis Presley concert together. They had been planning this for months, saving every penny from Linda's waitressing job at the local diner to afford the tickets. Sarah had laid out her favorite dress the night before, a yellow sundress with small flowers that her mother had bought her for her 9th birthday just 2 months ago. She had practiced singing Elvis songs in the mirror, imagining herself singing along with thousands of other fans while her mother smiled proudly beside her. But when Sarah walked into the kitchen that morning, she found her mother sitting at the small wooden table with 2 large suitcases beside her. Linda's face was cold, distant, an expression Sarah had never seen before. The woman who used to braid her hair and sing lullabies looked like a complete stranger. "Mama, why do you have suitcases?" Sarah asked innocently, her voice small and confused. "Are we going somewhere after the concert?" Linda didn't look up from her coffee cup. "Sarah, sit down. We need to talk." The 9-year-old girl felt her stomach drop. She had heard those words before from neighbors, from teachers when something was wrong, but she never thought she would hear them from her own mother. "I can't do this anymore," Linda began, her voice flat and emotionless. "Being a mother, taking care of you, worrying about money all the time. I'm only 27 years old, Sarah. I should be living my life, not tied down to a child." Sarah's world began to spin. "But Mama, I thought we were going to the concert tonight. You said we would sing together and—" "I'm leaving, Sarah." Linda cut her off sharply. "I've made arrangements for you to stay with Mrs. Henderson next door until social services can figure out what to do with you. I don't want you anymore. You're just a burden to me, and I want to be free now." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at her mother, waiting for her to smile and say it was just a joke, that she was just upset about something and didn't mean it. But Linda's face remained cold and resolute. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "Did I do something bad? I can be better, Mama. I can help more with the dishes, and—" "This isn't about you being good or bad," Linda said, standing up and grabbing her suitcases. "This is about me wanting a life. I never wanted to be a mother in the first place. You were a mistake, Sarah, and I've spent 9 years trying to make the best of it, but I'm done." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. The kitchen, which had always been warm and filled with the smell of her mother's cooking, suddenly felt cold and foreign. The woman standing before her couldn't be her mother. Her mother who used to kiss her scraped knees, who would hold her during thunderstorms, who taught her to dance to Elvis records in their tiny living room. "But what about the concert?" Sarah asked desperately, clinging to the one thing that still connected them. "You said it would be our special night together." Linda paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe sadness, but it was gone quickly. "I already gave the tickets to Mrs. Henderson. If she wants to take you, that's her business, but I won't be there." Linda opened the door and stepped outside. "Goodbye, Sarah. Try to understand that this is what's best for both of us." And with that, Linda Mitchell walked out of her daughter's life forever, leaving 9-year-old Sarah standing alone in the kitchen, the yellow dress she had picked out for their special night together, suddenly feeling like a costume for a play that would never happen. Eleanor Henderson had been the Mitchells' neighbor for 3 years, and she had always had a soft spot for little Sarah. The 72-year-old widow had watched the girl play in the small yard between their houses, had seen her walk to school every morning with her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, and had noticed how Sarah always waved and smiled when she saw her tending to her garden. When Linda knocked on her door that morning with Sarah's small bag of belongings and the concert tickets, Mrs. Henderson felt her heart break for the confused and devastated child standing behind her mother. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Linda?" Mrs. Henderson had asked quietly, glancing down at Sarah, who was still in shock. "This is a big decision, and there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," Linda replied firmly. "I've already called social services. They'll be in touch with you about temporary placement until they can find something more permanent for her." After Linda left, Mrs. Henderson knelt down to Sarah's level and gently took the child's trembling hands in her own weathered ones. "Oh, sweetheart," she said softly. "I know this is scary and confusing right now, but you're going to stay with me and we're going to take care of each other, okay?" Sarah nodded numbly, not trusting herself to speak without completely breaking down. Mrs. Henderson looked at the concert tickets in her hand. "Your mother said you two were supposed to go to see Elvis tonight. Would you still like to go? I know it won't be the same, but maybe it would be good for you to get out." Sarah looked up with red, puffy eyes. "You would take me, even though I'm not really your family?" Mrs. Henderson felt tears spring to her own eyes. "Oh, honey, family isn't just about blood. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who choose to care for us, and I choose to care for you." As the day wore on, Mrs. Henderson did her best to keep Sarah distracted and comfortable. She made the girls' favorite lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles with tomato soup, and let her pick out any book she wanted from the collection in the living room. But Sarah couldn't concentrate on anything. Every few minutes she would look toward the door, hoping her mother would come back and say it was all a terrible mistake. "Sarah, sweetheart," Mrs. Henderson said gently as the afternoon wore on, "we should start getting ready for the concert if you still want to go. It starts at 7:30. Sarah looked down at her yellow dress, the one she had picked out so carefully for her special night with her mother. "I don't think I want to wear this anymore," she said quietly. Mrs. Henderson understood immediately. "Of course, dear. Let's find you something else. Something that makes you feel strong and beautiful." They settled on a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had bought for her own granddaughter, who lived across the country. It fit Sarah perfectly, and when she looked in the mirror, she almost looked like herself again, except for the sadness in her eyes that seemed too deep for a 9-year-old to carry. The Memphis Coliseum was already buzzing with excitement when Mrs. Henderson and Sarah arrived. Fans of all ages were streaming into the venue, many wearing Elvis-inspired outfits, carrying signs, and talking excitedly about finally seeing the king of rock and roll perform live. Sarah held tightly to Mrs. Henderson's hand as they made their way through the crowds. The energy was infectious. People were laughing, singing snippets of Elvis songs, and sharing stories about how long they had been fans. Under different circumstances, Sarah would have been swept up in the excitement. But tonight, surrounded by families and couples who were there together by choice, Sarah felt the absence of her mother more acutely than ever. She watched a father lift his young daughter onto his shoulders so she could see better, saw teenagers giggling with their friends, observed elderly couples holding hands as they found their seats. "These are wonderful seats," Mrs. Henderson said as they settled into their row, about 15 rows back from the stage. "Your mother certainly saved up for good tickets." At the mention of her mother, Sarah felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. Mrs. Henderson noticed immediately and put a gentle arm around the girl's shoulders. "It's okay to be sad, sweetheart," she said quietly. "Today has been one of the hardest days of your life, but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm here with you, and we're going to get through this together." When the lights dimmed and Elvis Presley walked onto the stage in his iconic white jumpsuit, the crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the entire building. Even in her sadness, Sarah felt a small flutter of excitement. Elvis was really there, just a few dozen feet away, looking exactly like he did on the album covers she and her mother had collected. Elvis opened with, "That's all right," his voice filling every corner of the venue with its rich, powerful tone. The crowd sang along enthusiastically, and despite herself, Sarah found her lips moving to words she knew by heart. But as the concert continued, and Elvis moved into some of his more tender ballads, Sarah's composure began to crumble. When he started singing "Love Me Tender," she remembered her mother singing along to this same song just a few weeks ago, twirling Sarah around their small living room and promising that they would sing it together at the concert. The tears started slowly at first, just a few drops that Sarah quickly wiped away. But as Elvis continued to sing about love and devotion, the irony became too much to bear. Here was a man singing about eternal love and never leaving someone, while her own mother had abandoned her that very morning. Mrs. Henderson noticed Sarah's distress and pulled the girl closer, offering her tissues and whispering words of comfort. But Sarah's pain ran too deep for simple consolation. Elvis Presley had been performing for over 20 years. and he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read his audience. He could sense when the crowd was with him, when someone in the front row needed encouragement, when the energy was building towards something special. So when his eyes swept across the crowd during "Don't Be Cruel" and landed on a small girl in a blue dress who was crying while everyone around her was cheering, he noticed immediately. At first, he thought she might just be overwhelmed by the excitement. He had seen children cry at concerts before, simply because the experience was too much to process. But there was something different about this girl's tears. They weren't tears of joy or excitement. They were tears of deep, genuine sadness. Elvis found himself glancing back toward her section repeatedly throughout the next few songs. The elderly woman beside her was clearly trying to comfort her, but the girl seemed inconsolable. Something about her pain resonated with Elvis in a way he couldn't quite explain. He remembered his own childhood, the times he had felt lost and alone, the way music had been his salvation when everything else seemed hopeless. This little girl was surrounded by thousands of people celebrating his music, but she looked like the loneliest person in the world. During a brief pause between songs, as the band adjusted their instruments and the crowd cheered expectantly, Elvis made a decision that would change Sarah's life forever. Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage and raised his hand for quiet. The massive crowd gradually settled down, sensing that something unplanned was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice gentle but carrying clearly throughout the venue, "I want to take a moment here, because I see someone in the audience who looks like she could use a little extra love tonight." He pointed towards Sarah's section, and thousands of heads turned to look in her direction. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment as she realized that Elvis Presley himself was looking directly at her. "There's a little girl in a blue dress about 15 rows back," Elvis continued, "and I can see that she's having a tough time tonight. Sometimes life throws us curveballs, especially when we're young, and everything can feel overwhelming." Sarah looked up at Elvis in amazement, hardly believing that he was talking about her in front of all these people. Mrs. Henderson squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Now, I don't know what's got you so sad, sweetheart," Elvis said, speaking directly to Sarah now, "but I want you to know that you're not alone. Everyone in this room tonight is part of one big family, and that includes you." The crowd began to cheer and applaud, many people turning to smile at Sarah with genuine warmth and encouragement. Some were wiping away their own tears, moved by Elvis's spontaneous gesture of kindness. "What's your name, honey?" Elvis called out to her. Sarah was frozen, unable to speak or move. Mrs. Henderson gently nudged her and whispered, "Tell him your name, dear." With a trembling voice that was barely audible even to herself, Sarah whispered, "Sarah, I can't hear you, sweetheart," Elvis said with a gentle smile. "Can you say that a little louder for me?" Taking a deep breath, Sarah stood up and called out, "My name is Sarah." "Well, Sarah," Elvis said, his voice full of warmth, "this next song is just for you." Elvis nodded to his band, and they began the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love." But instead of singing it the way he usually did for the crowd, Elvis sang it directly to Sarah, as if she were the only person in the entire venue. As his voice filled the space with the tender melody, something magical began to happen. Sarah felt the warmth of his words reaching across the distance between them, wrapping around her like a gentle hug. The lyrics about wise men and falling in love took on a different meaning. They became about the love that exists between people who care for each other, the love that doesn't depend on blood relations or obligations. Mrs. Henderson felt tears streaming down her own face as she watched Sarah's expression slowly transform. The deep sadness was still there, but something else was emerging, a sense of wonder, of being seen and valued by someone who didn't even know her story. When Elvis reached the chorus, something unprecedented happened. The entire crowd began to sing along, but they sang it softly, almost like a lullaby, as if everyone in the venue understood that this moment was about healing a broken little girl's heart. Sarah found herself singing along too, her voice small but growing stronger with each word. For the first time since her mother had walked out that morning, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. As the song came to an end, Elvis looked directly at Sarah and spoke into the microphone once more. "Sarah, I want you to remember something tonight. Sometimes people leave us, and it hurts more than we think we can bear. But their leaving doesn't mean we're not worth loving. It just means they weren't able to see how precious we really are. After the song ended, Elvis did something that no one in the audience expected. He set down his microphone and walked to the edge of the stage, then gestured for his security team to approach. "I'd like to invite Sarah to come up here with me for a minute," he announced to the crowd. "If that's okay with the lady you're with, sweetheart." Mrs. Henderson looked at Sarah, whose eyes had grown wide with disbelief. "Would you like to go up there?" she asked gently. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Mrs. Henderson signaled to the security guards that it was okay, and within moments, Sarah found herself being carefully escorted through the crowd and up onto the stage. Standing next to Elvis Presley felt like a dream. He was taller than she had expected, and up close, she could see the genuine kindness in his eyes. He knelt down to her level so they could talk without everyone in the venue hearing their conversation. "Tell me what happened today, Sarah," he said quietly. "What's got you so sad?" Sarah looked into his face, seeing nothing but compassion and genuine concern. Something about his presence made her feel safe enough to tell the truth. "My mama left me this morning," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She said she didn't want me anymore and that I was just a burden. She said I was a mistake." Elvis felt his heart clench at her words. He had met many children throughout his career, had heard many sad stories, but the raw pain in this little girl's voice touched him deeply. "Oh, sweetheart," he said softly, "I am so sorry that happened to you. But I want you to know something, and I want you to remember it for the rest of your life. You are not a mistake. You are not a burden. You are a beautiful, valuable person who deserves to be loved." Sarah looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "But if I'm not a mistake, why did she leave me?" Elvis was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, Sarah, people are dealing with their own pain and problems, and they make choices that hurt the people who love them. That doesn't mean those choices are right, and it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that your mama has some things she needs to figure out for herself." Elvis stood up and walked over to where his guitar was resting on a stand. He picked it up and brought it back to where Sarah was standing. "Sarah, I want to give you something," he said, speaking into the microphone again so the whole audience could hear. "This guitar has been with me for a lot of years, and it's helped me through some tough times. Music has a way of healing hearts when nothing else can." He knelt down again and placed the guitar gently in Sarah's hands. It was beautiful, polished wood with intricate inlays, and Elvis's initials carved into the side. "I can't play guitar," Sarah said quietly. "That's okay," Elvis replied with a smile. "You'll learn, and every time you hold it, I want you to remember that music is love made audible. When you learn to play this guitar, you'll be able to create love and share it with other people who need it." The crowd was completely silent, mesmerized by this unexpected display of generosity and kindness. But Elvis wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver necklace with a small cross pendant, something he had worn for years. "This belonged to my mama," he said, fastening it gently around Sarah's neck. "She gave it to me when I was about your age, and she told me that as long as I wore it, I would never be alone because love would always find me. Now I'm passing it on to you." Sarah touched the necklace with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the silver and the significance of the gift. "But why are you giving me these things?" she asked. "You don't even know me." Elvis smiled, and his answer carried clearly through the microphone to every person in the venue. "Because, Sarah, sometimes we meet people who need to know they're loved, and we have the power to show them. Your mama may not have been able to give you the love you deserve, but that doesn't mean love doesn't exist for you. It just means it's going to come from different people, people who choose to care about you because of who you are, not because they have to." What happened next was something that everyone in the Memphis Coliseum that night would remember for the rest of their lives. The entire crowd, thousands of people, rose to their feet and began to applaud. But it wasn't the usual thunderous applause of a concert. It was a gentle, sustained clapping mixed with cheers of encouragement and support. Many people were openly crying, moved by Elvis's kindness and by Sarah's courage in sharing her pain. Parents hugged their own children a little tighter, couples reached for each other's hands, and strangers found themselves smiling at one another with a renewed sense of human connection. Mrs. Henderson, still in her seat, was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, overwhelmed by the generosity she was witnessing. She had brought Sarah to the concert hoping it might provide a small distraction from the trauma of the day. She never could have imagined that that Elvis himself would take such a personal interest in the girl's well-being. Elvis helped Sarah adjust the guitar strap over her shoulder and made sure the necklace was sitting comfortably around her neck. Then he took her hand and led her to the edge of the stage where she could see the entire crowd applauding for her. "Look out there, Sarah," he said softly. "Do you see all those people? Every single one of them is cheering for you. They're telling you that you matter, that you're loved, that you belong here with us." Sarah looked out at the sea of faces, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from thousands of strangers who had witnessed her story and responded with compassion. "This is what real love looks like," Elvis continued. "It's not always perfect, and it doesn't always come from the people we expect it to come from, but it's always there if we know how to recognize it." Years would pass, and Sarah would grow from a wounded 9-year-old into a confident, compassionate young woman who dedicated her life to helping other children who had experienced abandonment and trauma. The guitar Elvis gave her became her constant companion, accompanying her through her teenage years, through college, and into her career as a music therapist. Mrs. Henderson, who Sarah came to call Grandma Ellie, lived to see her adopted daughter graduate from college, establish her career, and touch the lives of hundreds of children who needed to know they were valued and loved. The elderly woman had never had children of her own, but raising Sarah had given her life a richness and purpose she had never imagined possible. She never heard from her birth mother again. Linda Mitchell had disappeared completely, leaving no trace of where she had gone or what she was doing. For years, Sarah would wonder about her mother, would struggle with questions about why she had been abandoned and whether she could have done something differently to make Linda stay. But with Mrs. Henderson's love and support, and with the memory of Elvis's kindness to sustain her, Sarah gradually learned that some questions don't have answers, and that healing doesn't always require understanding. Sometimes healing comes simply from accepting the love that is offered and choosing to believe that we are worthy of kindness, regardless of how others have treated us. The necklace Elvis gave her never left her neck, becoming as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The guitar bore the scars of constant use, worn smooth in places from her fingers, scratched from years of travel, mellowed in tone from decades of songs, both sad and joyful. But it remained as powerful as ever in its ability to connect hearts and heal wounds. 20 years after that transformative concert, Sarah found herself working at a children's hospital, using music to help young patients cope with illness, trauma, and fear. She still wore Elvis's necklace every day, and she still played the guitar he had given her, now worn smooth from decades of use. One day, she was called to work with a 7-year-old boy named Michael, whose parents had been killed in a car accident. He was staying with relatives who didn't really want him, and he had stopped speaking entirely since the tragedy. Sarah sat by his bedside with her guitar and began to play "Can't Help Falling in Love," the same song Elvis had sung to her all those years ago. As she played, she told Michael about a little girl who had felt completely alone in the world until a stranger showed her that she was worthy of love. "Sometimes," she said softly as she strummed the familiar chords, "love comes from places we don't expect. Sometimes the people who are meant to be our family aren't the ones we're born to, but the ones who choose to care for us." Michael looked up at her with eyes that reminded her of her own reflection in the mirror on the morning her mother left. She saw the same pain, the same confusion, the same desperate need to know that he mattered to someone. "I know you're scared," Sarah continued, "and I know everything feels broken right now. But I want you to know something that someone very special once told me. You're not alone, and you're not a mistake. You're precious, and there are people who are going to love you and take care of you." As Michael began to respond to Sarah's music therapy sessions, she realized that Elvis's gift to her had never really been about the guitar or the necklace. His gift had been the knowledge that love was always available to those who needed it, and that healing could happen when people chose to care for one another. She thought often about that night in Memphis, about how a simple act of kindness from a stranger had changed the entire trajectory of her life. Elvis had seen a broken little girl in a crowd of thousands and had chosen to acknowledge her pain and respond with love. That choice had rippled outward for decades, touching not only Sarah's life, but the lives of every child she had helped through her work. The story of what happened that night at the Memphis Coliseum became legendary among Elvis fans, passed down through the years as an example of the King's genuine compassion and his understanding of the healing power of music. But for Sarah herself, the story was never really about Elvis Presley, the celebrity. It was about the moment when a stranger chose to see her pain and respond with love, showing her that her worth wasn't determined by those who failed to recognize it. 40 years after that life-changing concert, Sarah still performed concerts of her own, intimate gatherings at children's hospitals, foster care facilities, and community centers where she would share her story and play the guitar Elvis had given her. At each performance, Sarah would tell her audience about the night a 9-year-old girl learned that abandonment doesn't equal worthlessness, that love exists in abundance for those willing to recognize it, and that sometimes our greatest pain can become the source of our greatest purpose. The little girl who had sat crying in the Memphis Coliseum, convinced she was unwanted and unlovable, had grown into a woman whose life was a testament to the transformative power of compassion. She had learned that families are built not just through birth, but through choice, that healing comes not from forgetting pain, but from using it to help others, and that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources. As Sarah would tell anyone willing to listen, her mother's abandonment had been the most devastating experience of her childhood. But Elvis's response to her pain had taught her the most important lesson of her life, that love is always available to those who need it, and that each of us has the power to be someone else's Elvis, to see pain, to respond with kindness, and to remind another person that they are worthy of love. The music played on, the love continued to spread, and the little girl who had once felt completely alone in the world spent the rest of her life making sure that no child in her care would ever have to feel that way again. That, perhaps, was the greatest tribute she could offer to the King who had shown her what real love looked like on a night when she needed it most.